Hi, welcome to another episode of Tell Me How You're Mighty. I'm Tracy Shorn, otherwise known as Chump Lady, and my co-host Sarah, alas, today could not be here. But today we're talking about liars. Not your particular fuckwit, although we welcome your stories, but the book Liars by Sarah Manguso. It's a story about a woman who endures a marriage to and divorce from a textbook fuckwit. It dramatizes marital betrayal, narcissistic abuse, and coercive control in a way we all know deep in our bones because we lived it. Sarah is our guest today, and she clearly knows a thing or two about the chump condition. She's the author of 9 books, including the novel Very Cold People, which was a finalist for the Penn Gene Stein Book Award. Sarah's an award-winning poet and nonfiction writer. Her work has been recognized by an American Academy of Arts and Literature Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Hodder Fellowship, and the Rome Prize, and her writing has been translated into 12 languages. She is, in short, the most impressive person we've had on the podcast to date. And get this, Chump Nation appears in the acknowledgement section of her new book, Liars. So you guys, you have to buy it because you're in the book. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me, Tracy.
Thanks for being here. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
So I was going to start with you wrote to me and you said that Liars is a novel. So of course it's all fiction, except for the parts that
except
are
for the parts
true.
that are true. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your chump story and why you decided to do the thing that so many of us think we're going to do, but so few of us actually do, which is write a book about what it's like to be chumped.
Yeah. Well, I was in the very fortunate position of having written books before, and the way that I process everything that ever happens to me is by writing. So I was absolutely ready. Um, my story is that I was married for 11 years, and in 2020, during COVID,
Mhm.
I was informed by my then husband that he was leaving me and he was gone the next day.
Then,
He
oh,
kept,
wow. One of the
yeah.
sudden abandoners.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, no, it was sudden. Really it ripped off the Band-Aid. And I very luckily had a very loving and alert friend who had recently gone through a divorce
Yeah.
and alerted me to your book, Tracy, and
Oh,
to your blog community. And that became my daily, I mean, I won't call it homework because it was just such a pleasure. It was my daily
oh, thank you.
therapy. I went and I learned about spackling and I learned about chaos janitoring, and I learned about the textbook fuckwit and the textbook chump. And like so many people who read and participate in your community, I realized that I had had such a textbook marriage and divorce.
Yeah. It feels so
Um,
unique when it happens to you, but then you realize that this is actually, there's a very common, sadly common experience, but manipulators only manipulate in kind of the same ways over and over again. It's predictable.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And I think one of the reasons that it comes as such a surprise to many of us, I mean, besides the obvious fact that we get married not expecting to get divorced, or at least I
Sure.
did,
I didn't.
um,
Yeah.
is that the narrative of the betrayed spouse is told so often from the point of view of somebody who's just observing the consequences of the abuse and not the day-to-day, gradual frog boiling covert abuse that takes place in a marriage between a chump and a fuckwit,
Yeah.
especially an unknowing chump and a fuckwit. So I was so used to seeing the story as the paradigm of the crazy woman
Mhm.
and the calm, long-suffering man. And I'm putting it
Yeah.
in heterosexual, heteronormative terms because that's the marriage that
Mhm.
I had. And that's the paradigm that I noticed in the culture all over the
Sure.
place.
Yeah.
You're jilted and then you just become so crazy. And I
Bitter.
really
Don't forget bitter.
Oh, and bitter, right. All these things that, we really shouldn't be, should be understanding and sophisticated. I mean, you've done such a good job like lecturing us and writing to us about cheating apologists who say like, you're just not open-minded enough if you don't, if you don't like being abused. And so what I really wanted to do with this book is to take the story and put it into give it to Jane, the protagonist, the wife, the narrator, the
Yeah.
chump. And she tells the story in a way that makes it impossible for a reader not to see that this is a domestic abuse paradigm.
Right, and that she's in every instance is being devalued and disappoint. I mean, it's never his entitlement is complete, and she's just constantly, being set up and knocked over and over and over again, and how that takes a toll, and that she's just made more and more vulnerable. And I just had a question about the narrative. So the book is coming out in July, so whoever I'm talking to, you haven't read it yet, but you're going to read it. But if you read it, the narrative, it's not like a traditional chapter book. It's sort of broken into vignettes. And I wouldn't say stream of consciousness, but I read it as like reporting. And it made me think of my own D-Day. So, and I applaud you for being able to write so clear-headedly about this. I have a question about this later because I don't think I could commit that many pages to how it works, But I just want to say like the D-Day experience. So when I had a D-Day, it was an out-of-body experience. I felt like I was floating out of my body at the ceiling, looking down at characters who this was happening to. And at the same time, it was like an
That's a
exposed
drama.
nerve, right? Like I can tell you the pattern of the wallpaper. I can tell you like what I was wearing, where I was sitting, what he said. I mean, like it's all burned in my brain. And your prose is like that. That's how this read to me. It's that the other part of it is like when I went through it, I felt numb. I mean, I felt things, right, but I couldn't feel them all at once. But observational, like I was apart from my body observing it. And I thought someone might look at the way you're writing and think it's like this is a clever narrative device. And I saw it not as a narrative device, but as like a trauma response that was very true to like what you're writing about.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, it was really important to me not just to represent the gradual um acceleration of John's abuses, but it was really important to me to show how destabilizing an event like a betrayal like this can
Hmm.
feel. It's
Yeah.
amazing that you had that out of body experience. I mean,
I
because
think a
that
lot of people
basically
do. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, that basically labels it as severe acute trauma. Um, and that didn't happen to me, but what did happen to me is something that I know from your blog happens to almost all of us. I was so surprised when in the first 2 weeks I lost 10 pounds and
Mhm.
half my hair.
Yeah.
I had
No, I don't mean to
no
laugh. It's like
No, I mean
it's
it's
such a
like
shock.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's surreal. Um and I know some people would go through so much worse. I mean, you can't sleep. I mean, I lost my short-term memory. I lost my ability to, it seems like, lay down memories in my brain.
Yeah.
I just had absolutely, I had like, I had like a teaspoon of brain in which I could deal with what was happening immediately in front of me.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, it would be gone. And so it was crucial to me to represent in the book, um, from Jane's first person narration, the way that trauma impedes a person's ability to remember things.
Mm.
And I represent that in the way that I was attempting to do it myself. And I have Jane repeat the same story, like to try to get
Mhm.
the whole story into a little capsule summary until she can safely hold on to it. And it takes her forever. She can't integrate all the details. She
Yeah.
tells the story to her friend and like forgets the most horrifying details. And she can't integrate the details and like complete processing that story until the trauma has passed. And I
Yeah, that's
memories
so
form
authentic. That's
memories
so what
form of
it's like.
safety. Yeah, and I know this from experience. And it was my privilege to try to translate this crazy intense experience into a book that other people can read. And I'm sure many of those listening to this podcast right now are chumps, and they will, I hope, be able to find some commonality in Jane's experience.
I think completely. And sorry, I sort of cross-talked you there, but you were saying that memory comes when you feel safe, and that you can't really have an integrated narrative of what happened until you're through it. And that's what I thought was so brilliant about the way the book is. There are these zingers, like these incisive little bites, like you're trying to eat an elephant and you're taking it bite by bite, but you're taking like one little bite of the the abusive element elephant at a time. And you know, and sometimes I find a lot of humor in being chumped. I mean, it's a dark humor, it's a gallows humor, but it's just the pomposity and the ridiculousness, and that fuckwits are such clowns. Their entitlement is just so over the top. And
It's
I think
cartoonish.
John is absolutely an over the top fuckwit of of epic proportion. Um, I guess the other thing before because I want you to read a passage, speaking of fuckwits, but I was thinking as I was reading it, getting to the narrative style, that to me, it's like Jane's untangling the skein of fuck uppiness, as I said, that this is just one long skein unraveling, trying to understand what happened to me. And I've written about this. It's like Chump spent a lot of time sorting through the wreckage. Like there's this disaster and we're looking for the black box, and we're going to find the black box, and it's going to explain everything. It's going to tell us, what happened. And at the end of the day, it's just the answer is so very unsatisfying. It's like, no, the guy's a fuckwit, right? I mean, you brought all this beauty and emotion and investment to this thing, but this guy was just a ball of chaos. And you can't understand it because you're not a ball of chaos. But to me, that's what this story is. This is like this beautiful, invested person who just keeps getting let down in the most grievous ways and keeps folding herself into smaller and smaller pieces. When you were saying, this experience kind of broke your brain for a while, how is that not domestic abuse? We're so afraid to talk about infidelity and the trauma of it as abuse, but you're a writer, like your brain is your living. How does this person not hurt you that way and not know that they're not, hurting the very essence of you, the core of you, like what you do, who you are, your whole identity?
Well, that was his intention, very
Yeah.
clearly. Yeah, that was his intention. And and I have to say, it's not just writers who need their brains. Like,
No, we
parents
all need
need
our
their brains.
brains. We all need our brains.
Everybody needs a brain.
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean,
but,
it's your creativity. I mean, if you don't have your short-term memory, if you can't string sentences together, if you can't, you
yeah.
know, my husband's a civil rights lawyer, and when he got chumped, he had like 6 months where he just couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate, couldn't do like at the lost
Yeah,
productivity.
yeah.
It's just, yeah, people don't talk about that. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I believe that. I think if we hadn't been, my D-Day took place in 2020, which of course was during COVID quarantine.
yeah.
And I think I hadn't, been in quarantine with my young child. If I had been around people, I would have probably had feedback from these other people, indicating like, oh yeah, Sarah, you're not in your right mind. But I was so isolated, I was already like stir crazy. I was like
It's the
off and on
worst.
homeschooling an 8-year-old. And it was almost I hesitate to say this, but it was kind of an ideal time to be processing that degree of
Yeah.
severe trauma, because I was already like in the nut house. I was like, I was in my house like we
The
all were,
world is in the nut house with you.
alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I was thinking how much worse it would be, really. I mean, that you can't do the simple things that you would want to do, like escape, run away, go somewhere, go to a movie, go see your friends. All these things are impossible
Yeah.
during a
Yeah.
pandemic. I mean,
No, that
it's
was true. Yeah, and to this day, I'm completely healed, but I still think back, and this is probably true of all chumps, but I think back and there are some gaps. Like I don't really understand how I got from
yeah,
like November to February, but we're all still here, so
the
I guess it
lost
went
ones.
okay.
Um, so so when you were going through it, I mean, obviously you didn't go through your actual marriage, not this fictional one you're writing about, but when you went through your own breakup, were you doing the Nora Ephron thing of like everything is copy? Did you think I'm going to use this pain somehow? I'm going to process this and spin it into something?
So I'll say it wasn't an everything is copy feeling. It was simply that I'm 50. I've been writing since I was 20, and everything that happens to me gets written down. I have a voluminous diary of, I think it's like 1.4 million words at this point. It's a digital document. It's not networked. Don't try to,
Okay.
there's nothing, yeah, there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
It's a writer's notebook,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, so like this really, writing this book was really just part of the like 30-year continuity of behaviors that I've developed, which is like, I do a thing or a thing
Mhm.
happens and then I write about it. Like
Yeah.
that's
But
just
what a
simple.
thing it was.
Yeah, this was kind of a big thing. Yeah. I should say, it's funny. I was contracted. I had a two-book deal, and this is the second book of a two-book deal. And when the deal was made, I had finished my previous novel, Very Cold People, which is a coming of age story set in Massachusetts in the 80s. And then the second book was going to be about immigrants to New England in the 1940s and questions about whiteness and who gets to be
Mhm.
white when, and it was
Hmm.
informed by the experiences of people in my family, and I'd done a ton of research and just a lot of like history and sociology, and then and then I had to say, look, like my agent and my editor, I said, like, look, like I know I'm supposed to write this book, and this is the book
Mhm.
that you agreed to pay me for, but I'm gonna write this different book. And they said, all right, just like do what you need to do. So I still haven't written that other book.
Hey,
Yeah,
it's you got the rest of your life, you know. This one you're gonna help a lot of chumps. I mean, people will
yeah,
feel
no, but I
seen.
was again, it
They
was
will read
like
this and feel
optimum.
seen.
Yeah, I had already been paid for it. All I had to do was write it. So,
Well,
yeah.
speaking of feeling seen, I was wondering if you would read this one passage, which I thought we were talking a little earlier about what it is to be a chaos janitor when you're married to someone who's just always like throwing bombs in your life when you're trying to sort of come up for some stability. And I thought this passage was really beautiful. So I would leave it to you.
Oh, thank you.
You
I
want
would
to
love to
set it
read
up
it.
or however
I
you
would
want
love
to
to.
say.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we've used the main characters' names. This is a book about a marriage between a woman named Jane and a man named John. And the only other thing you really need to know before I read this passage is that Eve is the name of John's mother. Okay. So this is from about a third, no, about a quarter of the way through the book. Jane and John are still married. I wrote to Eve, things aren't great right now. She wrote back, you're going through so much, carrying the babe and working and being hit off and on with fatigue and pregnancy brain and your London trip approaching. My most recent book had been nominated for a prize, and the 5 nominees were invited to a ceremony in London. It would be our last trip before the baby came. 2 days before the trip, John went out late and I fell asleep, my body weary from fetal assembly. The doorbell rang at 3 in the morning. A stranger's voice sounded on the intercom. Does John Bridges live here? I ran downstairs in my pajamas, my pregnant belly bulging over the waistband. A stranger had brought my bloody, vomiting, concussed husband home. He couldn't open his eyes, respond to questions, or finish a sentence. The stranger said he'd found John splayed on the sidewalk, face down. We'd just moved to that apartment a month ago. My first thought was, I have to clean up this vomit or we'll be evicted. I ran upstairs and got some towels and waddled back downstairs and mopped up the vomit on my hands and knees. John gurgled. He was leaning against the wall. His head drooped. A viscous strand hung from his mouth. He was trying to say something. He was trying to say, "You're welcome." I called 911. The EMTs arrived. The stranger handed off my husband to them. The EMTs snuck looks at my enormous belly and smelled the tequila vomit and looked into my eyes, silently telling me I was an idiot for having a child with this man. They wheeled John out. I rode in the back of the van. I had his insurance card and ID. I knew his social security number by heart. They wheeled John into a curtained nook in emergency. John kept trying to get up from the stretcher to go to the bathroom, but he wasn't allowed. I couldn't keep him from getting up. I asked a nurse for a urinal, which John refused to use. I asked for a clean sheet, which I spread on the floor. I lay down on it and tried to sleep. I wondered what the fetus was doing. The emergency department diagnosed acute alcohol intoxication, a possible concussion, and a shattered nose. No brain bleed was found on the CAT scan, but I'd have to monitor him for 48 hours for signs of a slow bleed. I called my literary agent and told him where I was. We didn't go to London.
Devastating. I mean, he's the baby, right? He's the one who has to be taken care of.
He's the
I mean,
baby. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
mean,
you're
part
being
of
so
this,
upstaged, Jane, it's just, yeah. I think a lot of chum, I mean, it's extreme, right? Not all of us have the comorbidity of an alcoholic or an addict in addition to a cheater, but it's that create drama, upstage you when, when the chump is about to be awarded, acknowledged, be their best self. Like it's this, it not only is it upstaging, but it's in this way that you have to take care of them. They're having this crisis. I mean, it's very common in the stories you get on Chump Lady that the minute there's a D-Day, the cheater threatens suicide. Or they say that their affair partner, has threatened to kill them and that's why they can't be with you. They have to go attend to this person. I mean, it's such an abuser dynamic is what I want to say.
oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, there isn't a one-to-one relation between the events in this book and the
sure.
events in my
Yeah.
life, but in sharing some of the details of what I navigated while I was married, um, it became clear to me that from people who knew more than me about addiction and about 12-step programs and about the way that addicts behave, it really does seem like uh cheater or fuckwits act like addicts, like the way
Mhm.
that they need to as you were saying, like wrest the narrative away, like they have to be the main character at all times.
Yeah.
um
That's a good way to put it.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and so I never really thought like, oh, that's just like an addiction, like you need the attention, like you need it as much as an addict needs a substance.
Yeah. Well, I thought of it in terms of kibbles. That was just like they have to
Kibbles.
ego kibbles, right? You write, I draw cartoons. That's kind of how I
Oh,
visually thought of it. Like you just have to keep throwing the kibbles at them, like this.
yeah.
Yeah. But to me, the whole creation of chaos, and it's completely self-inflicted. It's not like this guy got hit by a car or something. He did this to himself with tequila.
If only, right?
Yeah, if only. And also I think you set it up. It is this dilemma that a lot of people can relate to. It's like, do I go do the air quote selfish thing and get my award in London?
Right.
Or do I leave this guy in a pool of vomit? Chump Lady would say, leave him in a pool of vomit and go collect your award in London. But
Oh,
chumpy me living it would be like, no, I have this obligation to my husband. I have to care for him. This bond that we have, this marriage, this unity comes first. It comes before the self. And and what's so clear in this story and then in all Chump stories is that there isn't a reciprocal bond. It's
right.
it's never, and not only is it not reciprocal, it's like a vampire relationship. He just keeps sucking the life force, you
Oh,
know.
it's parasitic. Yes. And something that, well, one of the many sort of breakthroughs that I had in reading Chump Lady and reading All of my favorite commenters. They're, like many of us are there every day.
Yeah.
Um, People love to say that marriage takes work. It makes it sound
Mhm.
really like a really worthwhile, important thing to give our energy to. It takes work. And it was so important to me to pack this book with details because all over the world, domestic abuse victims are thinking, well, I guess this is the work that, just as you were saying,
Right.
like, it's not reciprocal, but, I've made a commitment, so I should be doing this work. And, my partner just needs a little bit more than I do right now and every day forever. And
Exactly.
when we
Yeah.
don't talk about the details, what constitutes reasonable relationship work on a granular level, we
Mhm.
enable abuse. And so, yeah, it's the critical mass of details that makes John's abuse impossible to deny.
Yeah.
This isn't just a one-off experience, this passage that I just read.
Mhm.
If it were, it would have just been, I had somebody tell me when I said, like, I don't know how I'm gonna go on in this marriage and like have this baby. Like, I
Mhm.
really feel like like I'm at a breaking point. And she said, in 10 years, this will just be a funny story about daddy. And I thought, okay, I sure let's keep going. But you know, like reader, it was not a standalone experience. It was one of the critical mass of details that, Jane finally stacks up so that she can see everything at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, but in the end, I mean, he's the one who John walks out, right? I mean,
John's the one who leaves.
she's holding
Yep.
the dream. She's holding the dream. She thinks that the marriage is going to get better. We're just going to keep trying. In fact,
Yeah, she's all in.
she's all
Yeah.
in, right?
She thinks that's enough. She thinks that's enough because she knows that marriage takes work. It's that vagueness that keeps
Work.
her
What's the work?
side. Yeah, this must just be the work. Yeah. Yeah. We need to get specific when we talk about covert and domestic abuses.
That's so funny you should say. I'm thinking back to, I think it was our third podcast where we interviewed Andrew G. Marshall. And that was the line he kept using: you have to do the work, you have to do the work, for reconciling couples. And Sarah kept going, well, what is the work? What does that look
Oh,
like
that was a
exactly?
great episode.
What was the work? I know
Yeah.
I was a little too testy. He didn't like me. But
Oh, good.
but I'm like, it is. It's so big. What is the work? Is the work cleaning up their vomit so you get your security deposit back? Is that the work?
Yeah.
Is the
Well,
work missing
apparently,
your?
yes, that was part of the work that Jane thought she had to do. Yes.
Yeah, but it's all this. So I read some of the people who gave you advance quotes on it, and some people came from this story, perhaps not having a chump background, as like an indictment of marriage, of the institution of marriage, and whereas I read it. I mean, there's many things we can critique about the state of marriage or our expectations around it, but I saw it as an abusive marriage, as a
Yeah.
very good. Not all marriages are abusive. I mean, imagine if Jane had had a partner who's like, "You go to London, I'm there. We're gonna enjoy our last, baby honeymoon, and I'm so proud of you." And people have partners like that. That's what everybody deserves, is somebody who gives the same way you give.
Yeah.
It's just like, what's going on that Jane is doing the work. What's going on in her head that she's hanging on to that dream?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a trend in the culture and in the publishing industry right now to say that, like, cishet men are all garbage. And, I happen to believe that the traditional marriage structure is an abuse dynamic.
Hmm.
Um,
Tell me more about that.
Oh, I mean, like a man and wife, like the nuclear family is designed as the husband, let's just say the husband, who can be someone of any gender,
Hmm.
um, is served by the wife, who can be someone of any gender. And the bar for husbands is in hell. I'm not gonna, I don't think all men are garbage, but the number of women married to men or partnered with men who have said that this novel describes their partnership to a T
Mm.
is frankly disturbing.
I'm sure. Yeah, I can tell you my mail is disturbing. Absolutely.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you read all your mail personally, or do you have people screening it for you?
No, I'm it. I am.
Oh my God, Tracy. Yeah. Well, you must have
Yeah.
like a really good self-care regimen to balance all of that horror.
I, yeah, it's horror, but it's also just like Jane. You get a better life when you're on the other side of it. And what keeps me going is the resilience. And like this podcast, Tell Me How You're Mighty. That's why we named it Tell Me How You're Mighty. It's that there's a mighty story on the other side of that suffering, and that people reconstruct their lives in beautiful ways. And I never get tired of the story of people going, enough, I've had enough, I'm done and I'm out, and I'll never be that way again. That that's never boring, so, and quite honestly, everybody's stories are so much alike. And I don't mean that cynically. I just mean that there's only so many moves on the chessboard, and manipulators and abusers behave in certain ways because that's how you get people with consciences to do things, is you shame them and make them feel bad. And you know there's just so many so everybody has certain details that are different, but abuse is pretty common, sadly.
It is, well, it certainly seems to be.
Yeah, but I think the thing in a marriage is that it perverts something that should be beautiful. It perver- that that a bond between two people, that you're there to really witness each other's lives and support each other and be there for each other. That's a beautiful thing. And that the fact that that sentiment, we'll say for in the case of Jane, is like weaponized against her. That's what's so ugly. And it's not that bond or that ideal that she aspires to is wrong. It's that this fuckwit has weaponized it, and she can't let go of the ideal.
That is exactly it. Yes, it's a kind of self-deception. It's a kind of spackling
Yeah.
that she engages in when she can't get rid of the ideal. I mean, and this is a story about an apparently progressive marriage between equals and how that becomes a domestic abuse scenario. Because women of my generation, I'm 50, women of my generation were sold a bill of goods for a new kind of heterosexual partnership that for most of us never actually materialized. Um, I think a lot of women my age went into marriage in our 20s or 30s really expecting that we had the vote, we had bodily autonomy, we can get
Not
graduate degrees.
anymore.
Yeah, I know, not anymore. Well,
Not
it was this
anymore.
like brief shining time in the
Yeah,
90s
that's
that I
right.
can tell you about.
Back in the day, we had
Um,
it.
but I think a lot of us naively on my part bought into this idea that like feminism had made it all okay. And I, like many other women, like had the rude awakening that just because I thought I was entering into a partnership between equals did not mean that my husband was too. I think a lot of Gen X men went into marriage thinking like they were going to get like a wife, but like a cool wife, with like a tattoo and like, a master's degree and,
Well, all
like
the wife appliances plus the paycheck. So you get all the perks of appliancing plus
exactly.
the money. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, in a way, it is an indictment of marriage.
Yeah.
It's not an indictment of the ideal, but it's definitely an indictment of what many of us had, cishet norm women going into marriages with cishet men discovered, which is that it's really hard to undo the emotional habits of millennia.
Sure. Well, and no time is that more apparent than when you become a parent. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just the speaking of devaluing, I mean, when Jane has a child, and this kid sitting in his wet diapers and his wet mattress pad or whatever, the fact that the father's kind of oblivious or going, I mean, this
Yeah.
could be on any Facebook page anywhere of mothers bitching about co-parenting.
Yeah.
I mean, and not indicting, I know, not all men, I can hear them, but it's something I think any woman could tell you about. And I was a single mother when, after my child was 4 for many years. So and I felt like a single mother before that
Or
point.
is
But,
little.
but
Yeah.
no, but it's
I did
that
too.
whole, it's all up to me. It's all up to me. It's all up to me. I got to
Yeah.
figure out how to deal with the sick kid and file my deadlines and do the things. And I just so many people, I mean, I hope the younger generation is questioning it's all up to me. But I think people, I'm older than you, I'm 57. I don't think that for older generations we ever question it. My mother's generation certainly didn't,
No, no,
you
no,
know.
they did not. Um, yeah, this is sort of a rehashing of a wonderful, very uh, sort of tragicomic or darkly funny comment I saw on a blog, but somehow I never hear a divorced man saying they're happy to be single, quote, because now I finally get to put myself first.
Okay, I'm laughing.
Yeah, I
The
know. Okay.
wonderful
Like in
laugh.
it, but again, not all men, not all men,
Right,
that's
right,
just
right.
like, you don't need to tell us that you're not like
Right, because
that.
we
It's
have
just,
chump men,
we know,
we
yeah,
have
we
chump,
know.
but yes, I that whole I think too, with Jane, the fact that she has this creative life, I saw it as this like life or death struggle. And I've heard motherhood described in this way too, that when you're a creative person, Jane's a writer, that you're having this life and death struggle to retain your individuality and your creative brain and the sense of who you are, this autonomous being aside from being a wife and a mother. And I felt like in Jane's story, she's absolutely struggling. She's trying so hard. And the other thing I thought was interesting is that with a baby, that's an actual baby. It means no harm. The baby's vulnerable. The baby loves you. That's someone that you would sacrifice for. That's a worthy sacrifice. That's a worthy, like,
Yes.
I have to be selfless. You are a child. I
Yes.
brought you into this
Not a
world. You are
partnership.
vulnerable. But a fuckwit, no. And she's kind of ping-ponging between this one void of need and this other void of need and trying to, like,
Yeah.
retain her
Yeah. Yeah.
identity.
And she does, yeah, you're right. Like she has these moments of like all she almost arrives at a final comprehension and a final understanding that it isn't the baby that's making it impossible for her to feel fully human. It's not the baby. The baby, it's interesting to be with the baby. It's fulfilling to be with the baby. It feels like a worthwhile practice to take care of the baby and to be a writer as Jane is.
Mhm.
And like she's just like on the threshold of understanding that what's sapping her energy, what's like, draining her lifeblood, it's not motherhood,
Mhm.
it's wifehood. It's
Yeah.
being the wife of a fuckwit.
Being a wife appliance.
Being a
That's,
wife appliance. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's not a job for somebody who's fully human. It's a
Well, and
job.
the job is never done. I mean, the goalposts move.
Oh, yeah.
You never get a passing grade as an
No.
appliance, as a spousal
No, I
appliance.
often think
Yeah.
about what it would have been like, well, for Jane, but also for me, like if I had known about your book and your blog long before my D-Day, I wonder if I would have if I would have stopped spackling to if I would have just been shocked out of my own self-deception. Um, and maybe it would have gone differently. I mean, it's impossible to know, because I
Right.
was
Well,
like Jane.
nobody
I
would
would
want to read me if they weren't chumped. I mean, it's
Well, that's something that should change because yeah, my life would have gone very differently if I had been made to understand the situation that I was in. Um, but my community of creative women married to men or partnered with men, we were all in the same situation.
yeah.
That and like communities form because people find commonality, and maybe we were all friends because we were creative women married to we're all married to fuckwits.
Yeah.
But it was an awful lot of them, and so it was so normalized. And I'm
It's
sure
normalized. Yeah, I have many thoughts on this. We could talk all day, but I mean, I
oh,
will just
please
say, as
please
somebody
jump
who had
in.
their face pressed up against intact nuclear familyhood through my son's formative years, I, you know, there's a status to being coupled and married and intact. There's a we vilify single mothers, vilify them. My grandmother told me I would die alone and that you could never expect another man to love your kid. That was what
Yeah.
was true for her generation.
You
I
know,
mean,
but that
so,
alone, just like, please let me die alone. But
well,
no, but go on, go on. I want to hear.
but think about this. I mean, for my grandmother's generation, she there were no workplace protections. There were not women in the workforce. There was not higher educational attainment. I mean,
Right.
you needed a man. So I'm two generations removed from needing a man utterly for your
Mhm.
financial security.
Yeah.
She had a family business, very successful. My great
Mhm.
grandfather had a business. She could not inherit. It went to her brother, the
Sure.
alcoholic.
Yeah.
So she had a great head for business.
Mm.
Couldn't have the money. So this idea that you must be coupled, that part of your inherent worth as a woman is being able to attract a good provider, a good man, a high status individual, whatever it is, it's in our marrow, man. We get taught this from the cradle.
That is true.
You know, there's a
Mhm.
reason people hang on to it. Now, we might have attained, economic self-sufficiency or whatever, but I still think that mind fuck is deep into our culture.
Oh, that is so important to articulate because I think it's so easy to feel like personally responsible for making a bad choice when in fact this bad, we're impelled to make this bad choice for, the entire civilization is screaming it at us from, as you say, from the cradle. But I think it's like pretty common. Maybe that, like, maybe this is like a chump behavior to feel personally responsible for having chosen the wrong person, and
Well,
it's all my
I
fault.
I think there's a lot of that out there. Actually, I had a question from a member of Chump Nation who read the book in advance, and she said on that very point, she said, looking back, it seems to me that Jane should have dumped him many, many times along the way. She's very smart, but she didn't dump him. What would, not Jane, what would Sarah, you advice be to other women just learning about their partner's abuse, disrespect, or narcissistic behavior? What lesson did she learn?
What lesson did I learn? Well, the lesson that I learned is that I was not what strong, smart, whatever adjective. I was not enough of that to sort of dissever my little marriage from this our entire civilization of telling me that marriage takes work and marriage is worth suffering for. I was not able to, disabuse myself of those abusive slogans, I guess,
Yeah.
for intact families. And the advice, I mean, it's giving advice, especially giving blanket advice. I mean, it's such a, a tricky prospect because um, Jane is in a cab at some point. She's traveling for work and she sort of like tells the in a nutshell story of her marriage about how they move around a lot because John keeps losing his job. And the cab driver says to her just point blank, why are you still with him? And that's one of the only people that Jane
Mm.
ever comes across who dares to say that. And she has a million, sort of like disclaimers and like, she's like, well, yeah, I know how it sounds like that, but John has
Spackle,
these
spackle.
spackle, spackle, spackle. Yeah, John has these big plans, and just this one little thing went wrong, but he still has these big plans. Spackle, spackle, spackle. I'm so lucky. Blah blah blah. Um, and honestly, like, if it, oh God, if it were only so easy to convince someone to stop spackling, to just, I don't think you can really effectively like hack into somebody's self-deception from the outside like that. The
Yeah.
person has to really want to do it themselves, and that's what's so frustrating, watching people make choices that the consequences of are not going to be good for them. It's
Yeah.
like
Well,
watching
that's
your
why I
children
started a
fail.
blog. That's why I started a
Oh,
blog.
yes, I
You
know. I mean, you're
like,
doing that, you're doing the real work, but it's like letting your children fail. I mean, it's like sometimes people just need to learn from experience, but they can also, yeah, I mean, it's such a mind game to think about what it would have been like to read your book,
well, or
like a
maybe just
year.
challenge those narratives. I mean, look,
Yeah.
because we'll say in the case of the story, because John leaves, Jane can go on to her better life and hopefully further literary awards and fame, just like you can. I mean, like your life is not over because you got chumped
No.
and moved on. I mean, it's sort of a new beginning. And but I'm saying that we model mightiness to other. I'm just here trying to collect stories. I collect them on my blog. You know, I'm talking to you. You're the shining light for someone else. Your book is the shining light someone's going to feel seen. So how do you break through that narrative? Is you show people the alternative. Like, look, you know, I had a husband walk out on me during the pandemic. I turned around, I wrote a great book. You know, like that's what it takes. It's like I think the whole stand by your man, stand by your marriage, it's so prevalent. I don't understand why we have two competing narratives in our world right now. One is like that Netflix documentary, which was all really kind of an advertisement for Stand By Your Man. All the
Oh, is this
chumps.
the Ashley Madison one?
Yeah, have you seen that one? The only
No.
chumps they
First
profile are
time.
ones that it made their marriage stronger.
Oh, good Lord.
I know, right? And we have that, and at the same time, everyone's trying to, as you said, it's very popular right now, deconstruct monogamy. We have thruples and polyamory and no marriage and different ways of doing it. And I keep coming back to, well, that's great, or whatever you want to do, but that doesn't change the human dynamic of cheating, which is a power dynamic. And that can happen if you're a throuple. It doesn't matter how many people, it just matters, do you have a set
Yeah.
of rules and did somebody unilaterally change them to benefit themselves? That's a greedy
That,
human
that's
fuckwit
it.
problem.
Yeah,
It's
but you
not a
can't make a
monogamy.
whole Netflix series about that one sentence because there's just not enough content.
No, I guess
Well,
not.
it is my honor and my privilege to work alongside you to change that narrative.
Oh, well, it's my honor to have you. I have, can you see if I had, oh, I had one more question. At the end, you wrote in your book, it says, I remember how desperately I had to cling to the story of my happy marriage. It took effort. It felt so good to stop lying. Do liars make chump liars? I mean, do they, to be with a liar means that you have to spackle? I mean, it's
Well,
not in the least bit equivalent, but I thought that that was such a provocative thing to say.
oh, well, that really is the conclusion that I didn't know that I was going to draw in writing this book because initially I chose the title Liars to describe the fuckwit and his schmoopy, to
Yeah,
use Chump Nation terms that we all know. Um, and by the end of the book, I realized that the biggest liar was Jane because she knew. I mean, she knew in her body, she knew in like deep, 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 she understood that she was being abused, but she was just too good at chaos janitor. She was too good at spackling. And so when she finally understands that it's her self-deception that has been propelling this terrible marriage and this abusive dynamic with John, that's when she says it felt, it feels so good to stop lying about that. And
yeah,
it's really then that she's free. It's not when John leaves. It's not,
right.
it's this deep internal awareness that she arrives at, that she just doesn't have to lie that her marriage was anything but terrible.
Yeah. I would say I just don't want to blame Jane. I think that we don't,
Right. Yeah.
there is a whole chump trope. Oh, surely you must have known.
Right, right, right. It's all my
And I
fault.
think,
Yeah.
you know, you don't know what someone's up to in their secret sexual basement, their double life or whatever. You do know, but to your point though, you do know that it's unacceptable. And that's the question I always ask people, is this relationship acceptable to you? And Jane never gave herself the permission to say, is this acceptable to me? That I
No.
matter and I have a vote and I can be, I am as worthy as this fuckwit. And, you know, I agree that there are generational messages telling us not to ask ourselves that question, but that's what it comes back to. Is this acceptable to me?
Yeah. She just doesn't have the data. Like she thinks, sticks and stones may break my bones, but John's not beating me up every day. So like I'm sure we can work this out. But, eventually she realizes that there's no such thing as a productive conversation with a liar. And this is when she's, early on tangling the skein
Yeah.
right after John leaves, and she thinks, oh, we'll have a conversation about what's going on, and how much he cheated on me. And then she realizes, oh yeah, no.
Sorry to laugh. I feel like
yeah. Oh yeah. That part
we know
was
how that goes.
Right. Yeah, no, that part was really fun to write. And yeah, I love reading your blog when you
can probably just
us.
lift whole lines.
Yeah, but it's like, they'll admit to what they know that and it just becomes this like hall of mirrors. There's no final truth at the end of that conversation.
Who would miss that? Who would miss that? Like,
yeah.
You're free. Well, thank you so much. Can you tell us about when the book is coming out in the US, when it's coming out in the UK, and where we can find it?
Absolutely. Liars is coming out in the United States on July 23rd. It is available everywhere, in the independent bookstore nearest you and online at all of the familiar retailers. In the UK, it comes out on August 22nd.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
That wraps another episode of Tell Me How You're Mighty. You want to leave us a mighty story or a fuckwit of the week submission? Check out our new website, tellmehowyourmighty.com. That's yours spelt YOURE. We've got all the episodes, show notes, links to our guests, and you can see the tea room where Sarah and I first met. If you enjoyed this episode, please review the podcast and follow us. Thanks. See you next week.